Welcome to Burn the Ship, the podcast that helps entrepreneurs go all in on their business, and we introduce them to professionals that can help them to do so. Today, we have a very special guest. Goldie, how are you doing today?
I'm good. Thanks for asking.
Yes. Please look to the camera, introduce yourself and the name of your business.
Sure. So I'm Goldie Rabaev, and my business is Life Psychotherapy.
Awesome. We so look forward to learning more about your business. But before that, we want to learn a little bit more about your story. And we understand that time is one of our most valuable resources. So tell us a little bit about your journey.
Sure. So I was actually born in Moscow in Russia, and I came here as a political refugee when I was 9 years old. So immigrant parents, grew up in Brooklyn, didn't know a word of English, but for a social kid like me, English was super important. So I learned that in about a month or two. I quickly became, the sort of kid that other kids turn into, what most of us therapists are like growing up, we're sort of born into little therapists. And, my journey was really all along to be in this field. I was super, super interested in psychology. My parents were scientists. And again, in Russia, psychotherapy, psychology was not very popular,
Mm-hmm.
So I had both my parents were PhDs. My sister was a PhD in statistics. So hearing me say that I wanted to go into this field of psychology was very strange for them. But they all supported me. And after high school, I continued on and I went to college and then I went to graduate school and I got my degree. And for a short hot minute there, I thought that maybe, I would be okay working as a guidance counselor in a school. And I did that for a couple of years, but I realized that I really wanted to work with adults.
Mm-hmm.
And so private practice was, it's kind of the dream of every therapist, I think, going into this field. I work with a lot of interns now, and that's what they all want to do. And I remember really wanting to do that myself, but it's this mystery field that nobody ever teaches you about,
Mm-hmm.
private practice. You learn the theories, you learn how to talk to people, but you don't learn the business, not at all. So it's this mystery business. So you graduate, you get your license, you study for your tests, you get your license, and then what? So I actually got pretty lucky and I got my first job in a company that's very similar to what I do now. So they gave me a space to work at. They helped me credential with insurance companies. They did my billing, and they kind of introduced me to the business. And I was allowed to work and I was allowed to see people in private practice. And that was super, super exciting. And I loved it. And a couple of years, down the line, not even a couple of years, maybe a year, oh yeah, a year or two down the line, I kind of thought about it and I said, well, why don't I learn more about it? Why don't I do my own credentialing? Why don't I do my own billing? Why do I need to wait to get paid on their time frame? So I started learning it myself and I learned that a lot of the things that they were doing by, pen and paper be done electronically. Now, we're talking like back in 2008, 2009. So people were really very much still doing things with paper and pen. So I kind of learned the ropes there and I started doing it for myself. And it was going well. I moved out of that space. I got my own little space and I hung my shingle on the door and became my own little private practice of just me.
Okay. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that background. I want to, of course, go back just a little bit. Your beginning was an interesting story coming over from another country. But the biggest thing that you shared and I picked up on was your
Yeah.
family's academics and them being scientists and, your sister being in statistics. How did you overcome not becoming that type of scientist? Now, what you do is still scientific. It is something that is dealt in that range, but it is a little bit different. How did you overcome that and stay the path?
I mean, I was never a math kid the way that I was never like a true math and science kid. I think
Mm-hmm.
at my senior year of college, when I took I was so afraid of taking biology, but when I finally took it and I aced the class, I realized how much I really did love the human body and learning about the human body. And I think maybe if I did that earlier, I would have gone on to med school. Today, my daughter is in med school, and I'm super proud of her.
Mm-hmm.
But so maybe that would have been more of my route had I started earlier. But I was just really, really interested in the mind. And my family, and even back then, I have to say, we still fight the stigma of psychotherapy today,
Mm-hmm.
and that's a little bit sad. And I think we're overcoming that big time. I really, really do. But back then, it wasn't really something that was so accepted or talked about. And I actually remember my mom talking to my pediatrician. I was probably around 16 years old. It was my well child visit, and my mom was talking to my pediatrician and said, "Oh, she wants to go to college to be a therapist." And my wise old pediatrician said, "You just wait. They're always going to need therapists. This field is going to blow up." And I don't know how he knew it, but he knew it.
Yeah.
I guess just from seeing kids and from seeing, people coming in with depression and anxiety. It's not like that's new. It's always been there. People just handled it a different way.
Yeah.
But my parents and my sister, were open to who I wanted to be. So
Well, good. Well,
that was
good.
helpful.
I'm glad that they allowed that to flourish. Now, I talked a little bit about family. Now, you said that you knew you were going to do this from like 8 or 9 years old. How was that with your friends, knowing that you were always looking into their mind as you guys are having a normal conversation? How did that work out?
Well, it's not so much that I looked into their minds, and it's funny, right? Like when you're in a crowd of people and you introduce yourself as a therapist, like one of the things that somebody always says, "Oh, are you psychoanalyzing me right now?" And I'm like, "Nah, I don't do that for free. I get paid for that." So it's not that I did that, but I
Hmm.
was the kid that, I guess, kids with stuff came to me with. Like if
Hmm.
somebody had a problem and they didn't know who else to say something to, I would inevitably, draw them to me. Why that happened, I don't know. I think, it's kind of like nature. Like you know who you can talk to, who's going to be able to sit with you and hold your emotions and give you time and space. And I think that, uh, you know, those of us who are sort of like the natural therapists, we have that from very early on.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good deal. I was just checking because in my mind, I looked at. I said, "Oh, okay. Who am I talking with today? Oh man, she's gonna analyze my every
Yeah,
step.
exactly, right?
I have to be focused and right on top of it." So I was just,
You don't have
I
to, don't
got you.
worry.
I got you. I got you. Now, you said that, once you got going, you were working with a company that does something similar to what you're currently doing. If you don't mind, share with us a couple of those lessons that you learned with that previous company that you still carry forward today.
So, I mean, they were wonderful in terms of giving me a start. But while I was working with them, and as I became, I guess, more fluent in the systems of the business, I just realized that a lot of the things that they were doing was just needed to be modernized, for the lack of a better word for it.
Hmm.
Like billing. Why send out things in snail mail when you could do things electronically and get paid way faster? We're dealing with clinicians who don't understand, how to collect copays, or and not explaining any of that to them. A lot of things fall through the cracks. There wasn't much coaching, which is some of what we do now, and taking in new clinicians and sort of teaching them the skills of the business, reminding them that this is not you're not just working for someone else, you're working for yourself. And so there is sort of a lot more to think of. Creating your own brand. Those were not the things that were taught there, but that I walked away with knowing that these are the things that I have to introduce if I was going to do this myself.
Yes, yes. Now, at that particular time, you were matriculating with them, but then the entrepreneurial spirit came out there and say, "You know what? I think that I can do these things a little bit better, a little bit more efficiently than what's currently going on." Was there an actual event that happened that made you say, "You know what? I'm going to burn the ship and go all in on my own management company"?
Well, so I have to say, probably on my own, I would have never done it. I'm not a risk taker.
Hmm.
I avoid risk, sort of, kind of. I think I'm better now than I was before. Um, But really, it was me filling my husband's ears with all of this information. So my husband was always in business. He's worked for, Morgan Stanley, Goldman Sachs, all the big names, and he's always been in the world of finance and business, and hearing how these businesses were run, and the state of the finance world at that time. My husband actually got laid off from his job, and when he got laid off, it was like a warning sign to us that maybe we should think about plan B. Well, really, he was the one saying that maybe we should think about plan B. Maybe just depending on corporate life is not enough, and maybe we should open up our own business. And he was thinking about different business ideas, and I said to him, well, why go into things that we don't know when I'm trained and I have a perfectly good business, model that we can kind of work through. And he really started working it. I mean, he was the one that, pushed to develop a website, and he was the one that really pushed me out of my comfort zone and said, let's do this for other people.
Okay,
And
awesome.
yeah, I mean, I there's this great little story, and unfortunately we lost it. But I was so nervous about how much money it would take to invest in this, and whatever. And so he sat down with me with like a cocktail napkin, and he said, "Okay, let's write this out." And he says,
Mhm.
"How many patients do you think you could see in a week? And how many this?" And it was all in a cocktail napkin. And I mean, I wish I had the cocktail napkin today. He remembers the numbers. I don't, but they were like ridiculously low.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I way undervalued what we could provide.
Yeah, and it's like that sometimes. You think, okay, I just need this for the minimum. Then when you get in there and you explode those numbers, and then I'm sure it happened pretty quick when you got it going. You're like, oh, we could have been did this.
Yeah.
Now when we talk about been doing this, I want you to tell us about what it is that you're doing. How are you helping these clinicians that are thinking about going out on their own? How do you help them?
Sure. Okay. So, I mean, Life Psychotherapy is a management company, and we evolved sort of into that, right? At first, I kind of thought people would be just like me. So I would give them a space, and we decided early on. I think my husband read some of those, McDonald books, and decided we were going to buy our real estate, instead of just renting space. Because you rent space, you're never really sure how the rent's going to go up. Are you going to have to move out? You have your clientele in the area, so we wanted security. So we wanted to buy our space. So my clinicians, I was going to give them the space, and I was going to introduce them to these services, and then I was going to train them. I was going to teach them to bill and teach them. I was really just going to teach them because I thought that most people would kind of be like me, wanting to learn the ropes of the business. Well, I was very wrong
Okay.
about that. Most clinicians just want to practice,
Hmm.
and they want to be secure in their business, but they don't want to do the administrative work necessarily themselves. And that took me a little bit of time to learn. Um, so we evolved into this management company. And so what we are today is we bring in new clinicians. We we give them the space, we give them the paperwork, we credential them with insurances, all under their own names. We do not attach them to ourselves in any way. I really, really feel that all those do not compete and whatever else is just damaging to the patient at the end of the day. If a clinician is working with a patient, they should be able to take them wherever they go if they're staying close enough. Money should not stop that from happening. It's a therapeutic relationship, and I feel very strongly about that. So we credentialed them in such a way that they could keep their credentialing. We're not a group. So we would give them everything that they needed to be able to step into a private practice and create their own brand and business. And the reason that I felt that that was the best level of care is because when it's your business, you really, really care about it. When you're working for someone else, even though you're helping people, whatever else, it drains on you. It just does. But when it's yours, you look at patients differently. You look at your space differently. You just, the people around you are your colleagues. They're not your bosses. So we have a completely different relationship. Um, which works really great here. That's another thing that I wanted. I didn't want people working under me. I wanted colleagues. It's a really lonely island here by yourself. And I learned that when I left, the first place, and I opened up my little office. I became a lonely island, you know.
Hmm.
So, you know, you see your patients, but you're all by yourself, you know. So this model, it was important to me to have colleagues, other people to talk to, have peer supervision with, you know. That was really important to me. So we give them all of this, right? And they get their licenses and they could step into it and they have the skills for it, you know, through school and whatever else. But what they don't have the skills for is running of the business. So this is where we also step in. And then we talk about how to treat cancellations. Therapists notoriously have terrible self-esteem in terms of collecting money. I don't know why doctors don't, but therapists do,
Hmm.
you know. Yes, you have to explain to them, you have to collect a copay. It's insurance fraud if you don't, it's not legal. You know, you have to do these things because it's law, you know. You are worth it. People are paying you because you're worth it. You're giving them a service, you're making their lives better, you're helping them grow, you know. So all of this sort of encouragement, working through with them how to deal with cancellations, how to deal with last minute cancellations, how to talk to patients about things like that, you know, again, not really taught in school at all for whatever reason, you know. um, they can come and talk to us about anything, right? And at this point we have a large group, so if there's case problems or whatever else, or they need to run something by someone, there's somebody always available for a chat. And so that creates for a really nice, really safe environment, you know. And I think that we are very unique in that. I don't know of another place like us that exists. I really don't. There are lots of group practices out there, but they work for a group. They
Hmm.
are employees. They're not running their own business. They're not entrepreneurs. All my therapists, each and every one of them is an entrepreneur, you know, and they're proud of that.
Yeah, it seems like you have taken out one of the hardest parts of being a business owner. I have worked with small businesses for many, many years, and a majority of them are great at whatever it is that they do. If that is, you know, a psychotherapist, if that is a plumber, that is an electrician, lawn maintenance, but they don't know how to handle the business portion or those business solutions. And sounds like you have created a foundation for them to really just focus on their craft. Would that be a good way of explaining what it is that you're doing?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you know, I mean, the funny thing is, you know, with the properties that we've bought, you know, and the banks and finance people that we had to deal with, you don't know how many people came to me and said, "You are so lucky to have your husband as your partner." I deal with so many people that are such talented doctors and maybe lawyers, but they know nothing about business, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Mm-hmm.
And so that part really, you know, that is him. And I think he taught us all, you know, in terms of how to look at this differently.
Yeah. And as you talk about inside of the business and the industry that you're in, one of the bigger topics that those clinicians have to make is it comes around insurance. Now, do you mind telling us a little bit about some of those advantages, disadvantages of, you know, just being self-pay compared to insurance?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so, you know, part of our licensure is ethics, right? So there's laws and then there's ethics. And ethically, we are responsible to provide services to a community that we are in, you know. So I have offices in several communities in New Jersey and Middlesex and Monmouth counties, right? And each one of my offices is located in a very economically different and multicultural area. So if I just provided services that were out of pocket and self pay, most people couldn't afford it. Even if you scale down the rates, you know, even if you scale it down to, I mean, I don't know what you could scale it down to for it to be livable for anybody to do this, but, you know, but even if you scale it down, it's unaffordable on a weekly basis for most people,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because therapy, unlike dentistry, unlike physicians, is something that you do once a week and sometimes even twice a week. So it becomes very expensive, right? It's cumulative. Many times, families, more than one member of a family sees a therapist. Sometimes they come as a family and then they see a therapist individually. So it becomes cumulative and it becomes expensive. And so if you don't take insurance, you're really cutting out, I would say, 90% of the community, just not in the areas that I work in. Now, obviously, there are areas that are very wealthy, and they might be able to handle that kind of financial pressure.
Mhm.
But but the people that live in our areas, we wouldn't be serving the community if we just went out of pocket.
Yeah. Why is it that a clinician would be hesitant to take it if it has that much advantages? Why would they not want to take it?
The truth is, insurances are notoriously difficult to work with. Their customer service in many cases today is outsourced to anywhere,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
so many times it's international. It's very difficult to get a representative to speak to that's gonna give you information that is useful. You spend hours and hours on hold time. The electronic systems that are better are not always accurate. And insurance companies, they have this phrase that they say, before you talk to any rep or before you pull up any benefit, claim, numbers quoted are not guaranteed, right? Right. And so that's really the way it is. So basically, anytime you submit a claim, you're taking a risk that you're not going to get paid,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and it's very difficult then to collect money from the patient, right? Today, there are laws that say that you can't really report a patient to collections, or even if you do, there is no real collections for medical billing. It doesn't go on any credit report, nothing like that.
Mm-hmm.
So there is kind of no, now obviously we have good relationships with our patients, and our patients have come to us for a long time, and there's an understanding. And so I will say that happens. It's a minor issue for us, again, but it's also because we really try, and we fight hard with the insurance companies to get paid, to get what they promised us. But it is hard work. I have people that are specifically assigned to calling and rectifying claims. It's a pain, and a therapist working alone in a private practice would not be able to spend hours doing that.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense because the time that it takes, that's time they could be serving others. Now,
Absolutely.
now you shared with me that you're up north. You said New Jersey. Is that where your business is you're just in that area, or can you help people outside of that area? Tell us a little bit about your geographical target.
So we are in Middlesex and Monmouth County, which is central New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
So I have offices in East Brunswick and Metuchen and Little Silver and in Freehold. So four different office locations. Um, we with telehealth, we are allowed to provide services to anybody in New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if a therapist is licensed in multiple states, like I, for instance, am licensed in New York and New Jersey, then I can provide telehealth to anybody in New York as well. I do have other therapists that are licensed in New York as well. There are therapists today that are getting licensures all the time in different states to be able to do that. And the LPCs, which is the licensed professional counselor, they're coming out with a compact that would allow those licensures to do telehealth in many states.
Okay.
So,
Okay.
so that's coming. Not yet for social workers. But yes, so law is that you can practice as long as the patient is in New Jersey, you could see them.
Okay, and for those clinicians that are in New Jersey that are going at it alone, when or why should they contact you so they can get that foundation? Like, when in their business, is it their first year? Is it 10 years in? When should they approach you to try to get that correct foundation?
So the beautiful thing that happened is, well, sort of beautiful. In 2024, I believe, the associate therapists, so the ones that are right out of grad school, that are getting their associate licenses, the LACs and LSWs, were allowed to work under supervision in private practices. Now, this was not allowed before. They were allowed, but they couldn't accept any insurance. So,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but now Aetna, Cigna, and Blue Cross Blue Shield allows these therapists to be under supervision, accepting insurance.
Mm-hmm.
And so we started that program in 2024 for Life Psychotherapy. Also, that enabled my therapists to start running their own groups. So they became their own little group businesses, where they could have up to 6 supervisees that could see patients, and bill under them. So we did that for them as well. That's sort of how we expanded Life Sci into that direction. We became sort of like their human resources. So we handle all the payroll and the paperwork. They didn't have to worry about that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so now I would say that if you want to go into private practice, start thinking about that, when you're in graduate school, start thinking
Mm-hmm.
about that when you're picking your internships. Are those internships going to be able to give you kind of like, my son's in finance and he has to get an internship in his sophomore and junior year of college, right? Because maybe those people will hire him when he graduates. That's the best way to get a job. And now it's becoming very similar here, but in graduate school. So if you have an internship in graduate school at a private practice, maybe they'll hire you as an LAC or LSW,
Mm-hmm.
and then they'll keep you. And then when you get your license, then you could be a full-time clinician in that private practice. So in groups that won't work, but with us, that's how it works. So we have several therapists. Actually, funny story is my very, very first college intern, that came in 2016. I interviewed her on boxes. My office didn't even have furniture yet. So we interviewed her on a box. She was my very first intern. She was a senior in college. Then she went on, she decided she wasn't going to go into counseling, but after doing an internship, she decided it's really where she wanted to be. So she immediately went for her master's, and she did a little bit of master's level internship with us, and then she came back again as an LSW, and she did that with us, and now she's a fully practicing clinician. So when she got her license, we just transitioned her, we credentialed her individually with insurances, and she became a therapist without missing a beat, you
Yes.
know and I think that's amazing because that did not exist before.
Yeah, it
you know
sounds like the earlier the better. The
yes.
earlier you can get in contact with you, the better. Seems like you'll help start them off on the correct path early, and then that way they won't have to try to play catch up. So thank you so much for explaining that portion. And one of the things that I did want you to share, because I'm confident that over your journey, your time in school, your time working with the company, and definitely your time in business, you have acquired and nurtured some best practices or business skills that have helped you to be successful. Do you mind sharing with the audience a couple of those best practices?
Yes, sure. I mean, I think the first thing that's really important is really grasping that a private practice is a business. It is That piece is just as important as the therapy component, because what happens is that if you don't understand that it's a business and you don't pair yourself up with people or learn yourself how to operate a business, you won't be able to provide therapy. You're going to go out of business very, very quickly. And I think that people don't recognize that. They kind of graduate, they get their licenses, and they're lost.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of people make mistakes. I think the other thing that's really important is that people really don't take the time to understand and learn the ethics and the laws of their licensure. I mean, if I could tell you how many times I heard on professional chats people saying things that are completely not legal
Mm-hmm.
or not ethical, not because they're bad people, simply because they just don't know. They never bothered to look. And maybe other people do it or they heard it from somebody else, you know but because I come across so many new professionals, I've heard of a lot of bad stories where people start out very early with dings on their licenses, with paying very heavy fines, with simply because they listened to a manager who didn't know what they were doing. So the manager got fined, but they also did.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think that part is really important. When you become a clinician, knowledge is your responsibility. It's just your responsibility. You cannot blame it on anyone else. With that license comes that responsibility, you
Yes.
know.
Yes.
And I think the other really important thing is that for people who love this field and want to see it grow and develop and want to eradicate the stigma, I think it's really important to think about your think about how you want to treat your patients. To me, the aesthetics of the office are really important. I would take you on a tour, but our offices are really pretty. We really put a lot of thought in how we design them, how we paint them, the colors that we use, the pictures that we put on the walls. I always provide coffee and chocolates because, well, especially for the kids that come, into therapy, that's like a huge thing that they're looking forward to.
Hmm.
So, but to me, it's important that when people walk in, they feel like they're doing something really good for themselves. They're not in this dinky place, in this, crappy environment. They're it's like getting, going to a spa and taking care of yourself. Well, this is your inner spa.
Hmm.
Your mind is an inner spa. So to me, it's really important that clinicians view that. They don't leave patients waiting in the waiting rooms. You don't have to do that. You schedule all your appointments, schedule them in such a way that a patient doesn't sit in the waiting room.
Yeah.
It's rude, it's disrespectful. you know um I think those things are really important.
Yeah, it is important to make sure that the small things are covered as well, because those small things can add up into big things. So I definitely appreciate you pointing those things out for those clinicians to take care of and keep in mind. And we've talked a lot about your story, your journey. We've talked about the businesses. You've just shared some magnificent best practices with us. But now I want to take some time and talk about you. So let's just say that the business continues to grow. You have places all over New Jersey and New York, and then you just take over the whole Northeast, and time and money is no issue at all. What is it that Goldie would do with her time?
I would travel.
Okay, okay, okay.
um I mean, the beautiful thing is that with telehealth, there's a lot of possibilities, right? So the patients have to be in New Jersey, but you don't have to be if you're
Oh,
doing telehealth.
mm-hmm.
Now, personally, I don't love telehealth. I love that in-person connection, but we never know what's going to happen later, and maybe telehealth will morph into more virtual reality, and that'll become more real than it is right now.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking forward to that. But I mean, I love traveling. I love experiencing the world. I love being in other cities. I love watching other people. I think people are fascinating. And I think, other places in the world are fascinating. So I'd like to see as much of it as I can.
Yeah, did you have a specific destination that's coming up soon, the rest of this calendar year or next? Got any big places on the docket?
Well, I'm hoping to go to Italy. It's going to be my 26th year anniversary with my husband. Last year we
Yes.
went to Switzerland, so I'm hoping to catch Italy this year. I'm also hoping to go to Israel at the end of August. We'll see how that works out.
Yes. Yes.
But I mean, just, that's just this year, but travel in general, I don't know. There's so many places that, I would love to go to. And I mean, we do like to travel a lot. And so I've been a lot of places, but, there's always more to see.
Oh, absolutely. It's a big world out there, big world. And definitely appreciate you sharing that. Always love this section because it lets people see, hey, listen, there's goals and there's purposes out there for you, out there and the reason why you're doing what you're doing. So thank you so much for sharing that. And now the next thing that I do want you to share is if people have questions about how your journey has gone, if they have questions on how you can help them build their business, what's the best way for them to get in contact with you?
So really, the best way to get in contact is either to email me, which is really simple. It's Goldie, Goldie, at lifepsy.com. Also, my website, lifepsy.com, has a contact us form. And that's for patients as well as for therapists that are looking for management help or services. That would be the best ways to contact us. Yeah, just let us know what you need. And, we're always happy to talk to starting out professionals, in the field, and, giving them some tidbits.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And thank you so much for coming on the show today. I think that you've done a magnificent job of illustrating what it is that you do. And we always honor our guests by giving you guys the last word. So, Goldie, if you don't mind, please look into the camera and tell the people something good.
Okay, sure. So My favorite therapist out there, the one who inspired me the most, he always says that forgiveness is giving up hope of a better past. You know, I think a lot of people come to therapy with things that they hang on to, and they don't realize that they are expanding a lot of energy on just something that they're willing to change that cannot be changed. And if you could just let go of that, life would be a lot lighter.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing those wise words. And thank you so much for coming on the show today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. And to everyone that is watching, be kind and thanks.